The funeral hall was heavy with tension, the air thick with murmurs as my husband threw divorce papers onto my lap, his voice cold and heartless. "I don't need a disabled wife," he sneered. My hands trembled as I looked up at him, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You'll regret this, Damien." That's when it happened. His face twisted with rage, and before I could react, his fist slammed into my cheek with such force that my wheelchair jerked backward. My body jolted, struggling to keep balance, the pain searing through me. Before I could regain my composure, what happened next was even more shocking. My name is Serena Brooks, and I am 32 years old. I never thought my life would turn into a nightmare. I believed in love, hard work, and loyalty. I worked hard for everything I had, and when I married Damien Crawford, I thought I was securing a happy, fulfilling future. Damien came from wealth and power. He was the only son of Richard Crawford, the billionaire owner of a $300 million business empire. While I had worked my way up in the corporate world, Damien had everything handed to him on a silver platter. Unlike him, I never took success for granted. Even though I married into wealth, I refused to live off someone else's achievements. I worked as a senior executive in Richard's company, determined to prove my worth. Richard himself respected my dedication. Many times, he had told me that I had the qualities of a true leader and that he wished Damien had half my ambition. And he was right. Damien was lazy, careless, and entitled. He spent his days wasting money, partying, and avoiding any real responsibility. At first, I told myself he would mature, that one day he would take life seriously. That day never came. I stayed in the marriage, convincing myself that love and commitment would be enough. But deep down, I knew I was alone in this relationship. I worked hard every day, while Damien simply existed, believing that his father's fortune would take care of everything. Even though I wanted him to change, I was beginning to realize that he never would. And soon, a single tragic event would change everything. One that would reveal just how heartless the man I married truly was. It was a cold, rainy evening when my life changed forever. I had just finished a long business meeting and was driving home, exhausted but feeling satisfied with my work. The roads were slick with rain, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement as I carefully navigated through traffic. I had no idea that within moments, everything I had built, my career, my independence, my entire way of living, would be shattered. As I took a turn onto the highway, my car suddenly skidded. The tires lost traction on the wet road, and before I could regain control, my vehicle spun wildly out of control. I felt the force of the impact as my car slammed into the concrete barrier. The sound of crushing metal and shattering glass filled my ears before everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My body felt heavy, and a dull pain radiated through me. The beeping of machines echoed in the room, and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils. I tried to move, but something was wrong. Panic surged through me as I realized that I couldn't feel my legs. The door opened, and a doctor walked in with a grim expression. His words hit me harder than the accident itself. My spinal injury was severe, and I might never walk again. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to process the news. My entire life had been turned upside down in an instant. But the hardest part wasn't the injury itself. It was the people around me, or rather, the one person who should have been by my side but wasn't, my husband, Damien. Days passed in the hospital, but Damien barely showed up. When he did, his visits were brief, filled with impatience and empty words. I longed for comfort, for support, but all I received was indifference. One evening, as I tried to talk to him about my fears, he sighed and checked his phone, barely listening. When I asked him to stay with me a little longer, he scoffed and said he had other things to do. The pain of his absence was worse than any physical injury I had suffered. The only person who truly cared was Richard Crawford, my father-in-law. Despite his powerful and commanding presence, Richard had a kind heart. He visited me every day, making sure I had the best doctors, the best rehabilitation experts. He told me not to give up, that I was stronger than I thought. His encouragement was the only thing keeping me from falling into complete despair. But life has a way of taking away the very things we hold on to the most. Just as I was beginning to accept my new reality, the worst news arrived. Richard Crawford, the man who had been my only source of support, had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. He was gone. As I sat in my wheelchair at his funeral, surrounded by mourners who whispered about his fortune, I had no idea that this was only the beginning of my real nightmare. Because what happened next would prove that Damien wasn't just a selfish husband. He was a monster. Richard's funeral was held on a cloudy afternoon, fitting for the deep sense of loss I felt. I sat quietly in my wheelchair, unable to shake the overwhelming grief that weighed down on me. Richard had been more than my father-in-law. He was the only person who had truly supported me during my darkest moments. His absence left a void not only in the company, but in my heart as well. Around me, people murmured in hushed voices, offering their condolences, but I could hear the real topic of their conversations, the future of Crawford Industries. Everyone was speculating on what would happen to the company now that its powerful leader was gone. No one seemed to care about the man they had gathered to mourn. As I sat there, still absorbing the weight of everything, Damien suddenly approached. His expression was cold, his movements deliberate. Before I could process what was happening, he threw a thick stack of papers onto my lap. I looked down, my hands shaking slightly as I recognized what they were: divorce papers. I looked up at him, stunned. "What is this?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, barely masking the hurt that was already rising in my chest. Damien didn't hesitate. "It's exactly what it looks like," he said flatly. "I don't need a disabled wife." The words hit me harder than my accident ever did. A hush fell over the people near us. I could feel eyes turning toward us, some in shock, others pretending not to hear. My heart pounded as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. He smirked, his arrogance dripping with satisfaction. "Now that my father is gone, I own everything. The company, the money, it's all mine." I couldn't breathe. He had waited for this moment. Waited until I was at my weakest, until his father, the only person who would have stopped him, was gone. And now he was throwing me away like I meant nothing. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. "Damien, how could you do this?" My voice was steady, but I could feel the raw pain beneath it. After everything, after all these years? And then something in him snapped. His smirk disappeared, replaced with something darker. Before I could react, his hand curled into a fist, and he swung. A sharp, brutal punch landed across my face. The force sent my wheelchair rolling backward. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as gasps erupted around us. For a moment, everything felt distant. The murmurs of the crowd, the shocked expressions, the feeling of my own pain. I touched my face, my fingers trembling as they came away red. Damien had just hit me. At his father's funeral. In front of everyone. I expected someone to intervene, for someone to pull him away, but no one moved. Everyone was too shocked, too afraid to act. Damien stepped closer, towering over me. His eyes gleamed with malice as he whispered, "You should have seen that coming." Then he turned away, straightening his suit like nothing had happened. "You're useless now. Get out of my life." I sat there, my body frozen, but something inside me shifted. I had spent so long fighting for this marriage, for a man who had never fought for me. But now I was done. And in that moment, as I wiped the blood from my mouth and locked eyes with the man who had just discarded me, I made a silent vow. Damien Crawford would regret this. As I sat there, still reeling from the pain in my jaw and the shock of Damien's public betrayal, I realized something. He thought he had won. He believed he had broken me, but he had no idea what was coming. The whispers around me grew louder. Some people turned away, pretending not to have witnessed what just happened, while others looked at Damien in silent disbelief. But no one dared to say anything to him. I understood then. He had always relied on his power, his name, and his wealth to get away with anything. But this time, he had made a mistake. I wasn't going to be the pathetic, discarded wife he expected me to be. I was going to fight back. That night, After being escorted back to what had once been my home, I locked myself in my room and called the one person who could help me, my lawyer, Daniel Carter. Daniel had always been Richard's trusted legal advisor, and although I wasn't sure how deep his loyalty to me went, I knew he was one of the most competent men in the industry. When I told him everything, including what had happened at the funeral, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said something that changed everything. "Serena, Damien doesn't own the company." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" I could hear papers shuffling as he continued. "Before his death, Richard transferred all of his assets, including the company, into your name. You are the sole owner of Crawford Industries. Damien owns nothing." I gripped my phone tighter, my heart pounding. "He doesn't know, does he?" "No," Daniel said, his voice steady. "He thinks he inherited everything. But legally, he has no claim. He's been living under an illusion." For a moment, I just sat there, processing this revelation. Damien had thrown me away, believing he had all the power. But in reality, I was the one in control, and I was going to make him pay. I took a deep breath, my mind already formulating a plan. I wasn't going to just take back what was mine. I was going to make sure Damien suffered for everything he had done. And when I was finished, there wouldn't be anything left for him to hold on to. For the next 2 days, I played the role Damien expected me to play. I let him believe that I was broken, that I had no choice but to quietly disappear from his life. He never once checked on me after the funeral, never showed an ounce of remorse for what he had done. But I wasn't sitting around, waiting for him to crush me further.
I was preparing my strike.
With Daniel's help, I gathered everything I needed to destroy Damien. Legal documents proving my ownership of Crawford Industries. Financial records exposing Damien's reckless spending and illegal transactions. Security footage from the funeral showing Damien punching me in my wheelchair. Audio recordings of his past verbal abuse, captured through our smart home system. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted justice. Damien had never imagined that one day I would be in the position to take everything away from him. But now, the moment had arrived. It was time to reclaim what was mine. On the morning of my return, I dressed in a sleek, all-black outfit, a symbol of my rebirth. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing someone new. Not a victim, not a discarded wife, but a woman who had risen from the ashes. I arrived at Crawford Industries headquarters with Daniel at my side. Employees turned to look at me, whispers following my every step. They had seen the headlines. They had heard the rumors. They all knew what Damien had done to me. But what they didn't know was that I was about to take control. I pushed open the glass doors to the CEO's office, where Damien sat behind a grand mahogany desk. He was leaned back in the chair, acting like he owned the place. The moment his eyes met mine, he scowled. "What the hell are you doing here?" His voice was filled with irritation, as if I was just a nuisance interrupting his day. I didn't flinch. I walked straight to his desk and placed a thick stack of documents in front of him. "This," I said, my voice unwavering, "is proof that you don't own this company." "I do." Damien frowned, his arrogance faltering for the first time. He grabbed the papers, flipping through them quickly, his face growing paler with each passing second. This is fake," he stammered. "You're lying." I crossed my arms, tilting my head slightly. "No, Damien. You've been living a lie. Your father knew what kind of man you were, and he made sure you wouldn't get your hands on his legacy." He slammed the papers down, his fists clenched. "You can't do this. I built this company." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. You've never built anything in your life. You've lived off your father's name, spent his money, and destroyed everything in your path. But this time, you don't get to win." His breathing was heavy now, his eyes filled with panic. "Security, get her out of here." But before his guards could act, the police walked in. 2 officers stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. "Damien Crawford," one of them said firmly, "you're under arrest for assault, domestic violence, and financial fraud." Damien jumped up from his chair. "What? This is a joke, right?" His voice cracked, his desperation showing. "You can't do this to me." I am Crawford Industries. One of the officers pulled out handcuffs, stepping closer. Not anymore. Damien turned to me, his face full of rage. Serena, you can't do this. I was your husband. I met his gaze, feeling nothing. No sadness, no regret. Just freedom. You did this to yourself, I said simply. As the officers locked the cuffs around his wrists, he continued to shout, thrashing as they dragged him out of the office. Employees stood frozen, watching as the man who had once thought he was untouchable was hauled away like a common criminal. And I sat down in his chair. No, my chair.
Because this was my company now.
My empire. And Damien Crawford was nothing more than a bad memory. Damien's screams echoed through the halls of Crawford Industries as the officers dragged him out of the office in handcuffs. His once perfectly pressed suit was wrinkled, his face red with humiliation and anger. The man who had always walked with an air of untouchable arrogance was now reduced to a prisoner, helpless and powerless for the first time in his life. Employees whispered among themselves, some watching in shock, others barely able to contain their satisfaction. Damien had ruled through fear and entitlement, treating people as tools to serve his needs. But now, he was being publicly exposed for what he truly was, a fraud, a coward, and an abuser. He thrashed against the officer's grip, desperate to reclaim control over the situation. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his voice filled with rage and panic. "I am Crawford Industries." I stood there, completely calm, watching as the man who had once held power over me was now begging for his freedom. "You were never Crawford Industries," I said, my voice steady. "You were just a leech feeding off your father's legacy. Now you're nothing." His eyes widened in disbelief. He looked around the room, searching for anyone who might stand by him. But there was no one. The employees who had once feared him now turned away, refusing to offer even a shred of support. He tried again, his voice shaking. "Serena, please. You don't have to do this. We can fix this." I tilted my head, feeling nothing for him anymore. No sadness. No regret. Just cold justice. "You already did this to yourself, Damien," I said. "And now you're going to pay for it." The police officers didn't wait for his response. They pulled him away, leading him out of the building. As he was taken down the front steps, the media was already waiting. Camera flashes lit up the street as journalists bombarded him with questions. "Mr. Crawford, is it true you assaulted your wife?" "Damien, what do you have to say about the fraud allegations?" "Did you really try to steal the company from Serena Brooks?" For the first time, Damien had no smug response. No witty remarks. Only silence. I watched from my office window as he was shoved into the back of a police car. This was his fall from grace. But my fight wasn't over yet. I needed to make sure he was punished properly. The legal battle was just beginning. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict. Weeks of trials, testimonies, and evidence had led to this moment. Damien sat at the defense table, no longer the arrogant, entitled man who had once thrown me away. His suit was now slightly loose on his frame, the stress of the trial evident in his sunken eyes and nervous expression. I sat across the room, my lawyer Daniel Carter beside me. I had spent years being silent, enduring pain in a marriage where I was nothing more than an afterthought. But today I had a voice. Today, the world would finally see Damien for the monster he truly was. The prosecutor stood, listing the final charges against him: first-degree assault and domestic violence, financial fraud and attempted embezzlement, forgery of legal documents, obstruction of justice. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The video footage of him punching me at the funeral had been played multiple times in court. Witnesses, including some of our own employees, had testified against him. The paper trail of his fraudulent activities within the company was undeniable. Damien shifted in his seat, his hands clenched into fists. He had tried everything to escape this moment. He had lied, manipulated, and even begged, but nothing had worked. Finally, the judge spoke. "Damien Crawford, based on the evidence provided and the severity of your crimes, This court finds you guilty on all charges." A hush fell over the courtroom. I watched as Damien's face drained of all color. The judge continued, "You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down, sealing his fate. There was no escaping this. No connections, no last-minute loopholes. His power was gone. As the guards moved in to handcuff him, he turned toward me. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but there was nothing left to say. He had destroyed himself. The guards dragged him away, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his downfall. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Damien was gone. His influence, his power, his control over me, all of it had been erased. Now it was time for me to rebuild. Taking full control of Crawford Industries, I worked tirelessly to restore the damage he had caused. Employees who had once walked on eggshells under Damien's rule now flourished in a positive, professional environment. Investors who had once doubted the company began returning with confidence. Under my leadership, Crawford Industries thrived. But my greatest victory wasn't in the company, it was in myself. I continued my physical therapy, refusing to let my injury define me. Every step I took was a battle, but I was determined to win. And then, one morning, standing in my office, I did something I hadn't done in months. I took a step, then another, and another. It was slow, shaky, but it was mine. Tears burned in my eyes as I stood tall, no longer a victim, no longer the woman Damien had discarded. I had been broken once.
But now?
I had rebuilt myself, stronger, wiser, unstoppable. And this was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, justice, and ultimate redemption, don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of Serena's journey? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.